morning, everybody. Okay, I'm going to begin this class with the stimulants.
Cup of coffee.
So we must thank the Rebbeinu Shalom for this gift known as coffee. The history of coffee begins with the legend. The legend, you know the legend of the dancing goats? You don't know the legend of the dancing goats. There was a fellow watching his herd out somewhere in Ethiopia, and it was a hot day, and he realized that he might be exhausted, but his goats were lebedik, were dancing. And he wondered why, and he watched his goats eating off some berries. And then he realized that these goats remained active, even late at night. So he tried some of the berries, and he realized that Taka, it has something to offer. And give him a kick. He was kept him up. And those, of course, were coffee berries. It's a product that originates in Ethiopia, made its way into Yemen, traveled up the Arabian Peninsula, and it was the drink of the Muslims who, after their prayers, cannot have a l'chaim, so they have to settle for some kind of other beverage. They drink their coffee. It was a drink that we must give credit to the Muslims, for introducing it to the world. Eventually, now it's interesting to note that the earliest tshuvos that you will find about coffee are ones that are dealing with Egypt, Turkey. They're not European. The Europeans were not familiar with coffee until early in the 17th century. Now, before we begin our discussion, the halachic discussion about coffee, we'll begin with a story. And this is a story that's taking place in the early 1720s. It's London, England. And Rabbi Yaakov is visiting London, collecting debts owed to his late father. And it was sometime during the day, he decides to stop for a coffee in one of the several coffee houses that were popping up there in London. He walks in, orders a coffee. I doubt it was a frappuccino. I doubt it was something that takes a long time to ask for: double latte, cream crumb, latte grande. No need for that. I think he just ordered a simple cup of coffee. And he sat down and he started enjoying the beverage. Rabbi Yaakov loved coffee. He was approached by a young man, a Fumayid. And the local young man said to him, "Are you not aware of the fact that there are some significant halachic issues with coffee? Did you not hear the rumors that when they process the coffee bean, they add animal fats, some lard is used in the process? Are you not familiar with it?" They asked Rav Yaakov. He waved his hand and he basically indicated to the young man, bug off, I'm enjoying my cup of coffee here. Please, don't bother me right now. But as he walked out, he realized that he's in trouble. London was a volatile place. It was a new community. 1720, the Jewish community is perhaps 60 years old. It's a developing community. And as a result of the fact that this was new, the presence of Jewish people, the fact that many were interacting with society and becoming a little bit more modern. The norm is that when you have a drive and a shift in the direction of modernity, you're going to have some old-time zealots trying to retain the old traditions. London had its fair share of Hanaim, zealots. Rabbi Yaakov knew very well that it was only 2 decades ago that the community decided that their local rabbi was a heretic. The great rabbi, Rabbi David Nieto, got up in Shabbos, 1702, and his drasha in Ladino actually, was that you should know, gentlemen, that there's no such thing as nature. God is nature and nature is God. That was his drasha. La naturas es Dios y Dios es la natural. And a wonderful drasha he gave there. The Kanoim went berserk. Is he denying the existence of God? Is this the reappearance of the philosophy of Spinoza here in England? So they decided to make a tumult. It was a well-respected guest in Shul. And after davening, he said, I am not going to enter into the Kiddush because I will no longer be under the same roof with such a heretic. These were the Kanoim of London, 1702. The Shaila was sent, what's the status of our rabbi? What do we do with him? To the Chacham Tzvi. And the Chacham Tzvi at the time was in Amsterdam, and he claimed, you guys are nuts. All he was saying is the fact that everything within nature is a gift from the Ribbono Shel Olam. Don't believe that there are forces that are independent of God. Everything is indeed from the Ribbono Shel Olam. Bug off your rabbi. But there were zealots there. And Rabbi Yaakov was very aware of it. And he knew that he is now in trouble. Because he was a known person. He was the son of the Chacham Tzvi, known to us as Rav Yaakov Emden. So Rav Yaakov Emden realizes that now I am asking for trouble. And the coffee was good, but what's waiting for me is not so good. And within a very short period of time, he gets a letter from Rabbi Yehuda Leib Nardin. And Rabbi Nardin, we don't know too much about him. But one thing we do know, he didn't like coffee. That Rabbi Nardin told him that you should know that everyone knows of these rumors, and here in London we are careful. In our community we don't walk into a coffee house. And that you come visiting with your reputation and drinking there, it is quite disturbing. And Rav Yaakov Emden in his Chuvas defends the fact that he drank the cup, but at the same time apologized due to the reality that it's a location that is avoided in their community. So that's the story. But what were the halachic issues of coffee that they were dealing with? Tonight, what we're going to try to do is share with you a tshuva, at least one tshuva from the 16th century, one from the 17th, one from the 18th, one from the 19th, one from the 20th, and even one tshuva from the 21st century that deals with the wonderful beverage known to us as coffee. Now, the first posek, I believe, that actually deals with the question, with the issue of coffee, is the Radvaz. Radvaz was a Gadol B'Yisrael. He wrote more than 3,000 shuvot. Rabbi David ben Shlomo ibn Zimra lived in the 16th century, passed away in the year 1573. He was in his mid-90s when he passed away. A very well-respected authority, lived in some time in Eretz Israel and in Egypt as well. And someone asked him a question, Sha'alta mimeni, he responds, you asked me about the status of Hapri Hanikra Elbon. What's the status of Elbon? Elbon. Vel Hakuha Shuhu Tafshil, and about the kuha that is made from the Elbon. So he writes that you should know, there's nothing wrong with it, but the way people drink it, the fact that people get together and drink it b'mesibot. Now, the word mesiba usually is translated as a party. But the word mesiba, in this context, could very well mean some kind of circle. There was actually a traveler in 1583, so this is a contemporary. So this is a German physician who made his way to the Near East. His name was Leonard Rahulf. And he talks about a beverage as black as ink that was useful against numerous illnesses, particularly those of the stomach. Its customers take it in the morning in a porcelain cup that is passed around and from which each one drinks a cupful. So they would sit together in a circle, mesiba, like the word sover, take a little drink, hand it to the next guy, and the cup would go around. That was how they would drink coffee in Turkey in the 16th century and in Egypt as well. So now that we have an understanding of the issue, Radva says, listen, I believe that it's not too beneficial. There are many takalot, there are pitfalls if you have one of those get-togethers with society drinking your cup of coffee. And if you really need it, just bring it home. And then he writes that you should know, in my opinion, you want to know what I think about the coffee? Ein bo lo ta'am, it has no flavor. Velo reach, it has no aroma. Velo mareh, and it doesn't look good. So I don't think it's such a popular item anyway. This is my personal take. I'm not a big coffee fan. Notes the Radvaz in the 16th century. So what he deals with is a problem of interaction. You're interacting with society when you drink your coffee. And how much more so as the product was introduced into Europe. Coffee is introduced. Now, we have to remember, this is an Arabic drink. What do good Christians drink? You know, they drink their wine. They come for the communion. And when it comes to the Muslims, they have their coffee. So it's interesting to note that halachically speaking, for the Christians, it wasn't so simple that it's a permissible drink. There's a legend that in the beginning of the 17th century, as the Venetian merchants are bringing the product into Europe, so the local clergy was unhappy with it. It's a Muslim drink. It is the bitter invention of the Satan. So they didn't know the status, so they needed a psak from the Pope. So they go to Pope Clement VIII, and he was asked to intervene. But believe it or not, and we could be inspired by him, before making a decision, he wanted to taste the beverage. And he liked it. So therefore, Europe had coffee. One person, little gulp. Imagine the historical moment that is. Clement is holding the cup. He looks up, and he goes, "Takigit," and the result is that Europe has coffee. But as coffee is introduced into Europe, and as the halachic poskim have to deal with it, they are concerned for several reasons. Number one, is there a problem of bishul akum? It's cooked by a non-Jew. The product that we are drinking right now in second cup, unless it's from the kosher second cup up there, so it's not. So now we have a serious issue before you take your next gulp, or perhaps take your next gulp right now. The question is there a problem of an item cooked by a non-Jew? Serious issue here. We just talked about it the week before. So, says Rabbi Meir Eisenstadt, the Panim Meirot, early 18th century, and he notes that this is indeed problematic. It's Oleh al Shulchan Melachim, kings drink it, and if kings drink it, we have a rule that any item that will be placed on a royal banquet is one that the rabbis prohibited if it's cooked by the non-Jews. So he said, do not drink coffee if it's not cooked by a Jew. It's a minority opinion. Worry not. And other rabbinic authorities, among them the Pri Chadash, 17th century, And he gives us two reasons why there is absolutely no concern for the coffee. Reason number one, he argues that this prohibition of an item cooked by a non-Jew, it is only if it is an integral part of a meal, what's known as lelapet bo et apat. It is part of your bread. Meaning, if a piece of chicken, a piece of chicken is an integral part of a meal, is cooked by a non-Jew, it's problematic. Fish cooked by a non-Jew, problematic. But something that's not an integral part of a meal, but you happen to drink sometime during the day, that's not included in the prohibition. Reason number one of Rav Hiskia de Silwa. Reason number two, what bracha do you make on coffee? Shahako. Well, it's a fruit. Why do we not make a bore pri ha'etz? Answer is that it's nullified, that we do not view it that you are drinking a berry. You are drinking water that happens to be flavored with the byproduct of a fruit. So it is in essence water that is flavored with something. And just as regarding the laws of brachot, you view it as a beverage, it is water that's flavored. So regarding a cooked, it is basically water that happens to be cooked with flavor. So therefore there is no issue of bishulakum. That's what he argues, and he made it very, very clear. Do not even dream of prohibiting such an item. Because, notes the Pri Chadash, if you want clarity, you must have your cup of coffee. And he's writing this in 17th century. He made his way to Amsterdam. He enjoyed his coffee. And when he talks about it, and when he mentions the fact that he is of the opinion that there is no problem of Chalav Israel in a city where all farmers only have kosher species, as he pointed out, Amsterdam happened to be the case, and he says that I myself drank the milk in Amsterdam. Where did he drink the milk? In a coffee house, because he liked his coffee. So, that was one of the halachic issues that was dealt with. But there was something much greater, and that had to do with social gatherings. And as 19th century authority noted, there was a to-do in Nikolsburg, the city of Nikolsburg, Moravia, that the Jewish community enjoyed their coffee, and they would frequent the coffee houses. Coffee houses were not just places to get your fix, but you would converse, you would interact with society. Business transactions were done there. Academics existed there. It was known as the penny university. You paid a penny and you got yourself a little bit of an education there. Revolutions were made there. The first ballot boxes given, they give credit to the concept from a coffee house. But if you interact with society, is there not a concern that the values that you believe in are going to be watered down or perhaps tampered from the new winds that are present in society? So some rabbis were uncomfortable with the coffee house. So there was a rabbi in Nikolsburg, a little bit of a zealot. His name was Rabbi Weinberger. And it's the local Weinbergers, it's their job to determine if they are related or not. But Rabbi Avraham Isaac Weinberger came up with a wonderful idea. A Jewish coffee house. Meaning a coffee house that's under hashgacha, but not so much for the product, not for what's going into your mouth, but what's coming into your ears. That was the idea of the coffee house. Wonderful. So it worked well for Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, but people wanted coffee on Shabbos as well. And the non-Jewish coffee houses, they somehow managed to get there on Shabbos as well. So Rabbi Weinberg needed a heter, a leniency, to get a non-Jew to produce coffee on Shabbos. And he argued that I need this leniency because if you could give me a rabbi, and he turned to Reb Shlomo Kluger, he turns to Rabbi Sod, he turned to the great poskim of the middle of the 19th century, arguing that if you guys come up with a leniency that I could get coffee on Shabbos, I'm protecting Judaism. They didn't succeed, even though they gave him credit. And as Rabbi Sod notes, that Shama nechshelu harbe na'arei bnei Israel, that coffee house is problematic because it was a downfall for other transgressions, including Chilul Shabbat. There was tension there, and there was a concern about the negative impact of the coffee house. And he's not the only one. There are several that identified it. And it's interesting to note the Shabbos issue with coffee house was one that was extremely significant. You know, Chassam Sofer was born in Frankfurt. He took pride in the fact that he was originally from Frankfurt. And even after spending many years with the Hungarians, he liked signing his letters with Moshe Akatan from Frankfurt am Main, meaning I'm German. With all due respect to the Hungarians, he was saying, I still take pride in the fact that I am a German Jew. And he shared with his disciples the fact that in his youth, there were Balabatim in Frankfurt that were extremely committed to Oneg Shabbos. Included in their Oneg Shabbos was a cup of coffee. So this is late 18th century. And he talks about ways how they figured out to get their fix on Shabbos. Now it's interesting to note that there's a dispute. Some of his disciples record the brilliance or the invention of the Frankfurt Jews in one way. He in his Tshuva describes it in another way. There are those, and I don't think it's correct, but there are those who describe, disciples of Chassam Sofer, who describe what was done in Frankfurt, that they took a long rope. I don't even know if it's possible. They took a long rope. It was a rope that had some kind of salt. I don't know exactly what material it was, that they would light it before Shabbos. The rope would burn for a period of 12 hours. After 12 hours, it would reach the fireplace, and then the fireplace would ignite, and it would cook the coffee. That was the chap they had. That's a description that's given. I don't know if it's possible, but I don't think it's true, because the Chassam Sofer in the Tshuva himself, when he talks about the Frankfurt Jews and their coffee, he says that what they did was that they would cook the beans or the grounds before Shabbos, and then add hot water again on Shabbos. That's what he discussed. But in any event, Shabbos and coffee was an issue that was extremely significant. The poskim discuss it. I mentioned last week a heter from the Chayei Adam. You remember the heter of the Chayei Adam? That he says that Shulchan Aruch has a debate. Bread baked by a non-Jew on Shabbos for himself, meaning he did not have you in mind. If you ask a non-Jew to bake bread for you on Shabbos, it is prohibited. Even if you ask him from before Shabbos. What if he cooked it for himself and then he offers it to you? So the Shulchan Aruch shares with us two opinions, and the Ramah notes that in case of need, you could rely on the lenient opinion. So there is a leniency when you were not the one they intended the product for to go ahead and enjoy it on Shabbos. So the question is, can we take this leniency b'makom tzarech and apply it to coffee? That's what the poskim discuss. So in the 19th century, the Chayei Adam gives a green light for the coffee. So therefore I mentioned that if you are in a hotel, they don't know about you, you don't know about them, you happen to come down and there's coffee being made in the morning, it is permissible to go ahead, according to the Chayei Adam, to enjoy a wonderful cup of coffee. On the other hand, I made it clear as well that the Ramah notes that if you paid for it specifically before Shabbos, it is considered as if they made it specifically for you. So therefore it will not work, despite the fact that many of us would love it, yes, to work, to go to Starbucks before Shabbos, give them $2 and say, you know what, I'll be back tomorrow for my cup of coffee. That doesn't work, because by giving them the money, they have you in mind. That's what the Ramah seems to indicate. Fine. Poskim deal with this comparison between coffee and bread, and among them was Rav Yaakov Reisher. Rav Yaakov Reisher in the beginning of the 18th century. And he says that you should know, true, there were those that were lenient with bread, but coffee is not as important as bread. And he notes, despite the fact that this is something that Bnei Adam lehutim acharehem. Lahut means there's excitement, there's an addiction. After coffee, it's still not bread. There was excitement. There was an addiction that existed. Coffee was something that got people moving. They perhaps were in a bad mood until they got their cup. This was already in existence early in the 18th century. However, what I want to do is return to London and revisit that issue and how Rabbi Yaakov Emden defends his indulgence with the coffee in the London Coffee House of 1721. So he notes that there are a few rules here. Number one, in Jewish law, we talk about nullification. We're familiar with it. Less than 60th, it's nullified. More than 60th, it's not nullified. You're cooking that chicken soup. The grandchild walks in and is spinning that bottle. Some milk squirts out and falls into the chicken soup. If it's less than a 60th, it is nullified. Fine. The Gemara mentions another piece of information, and that is known as a noten ta'am livgam. If something gives a flavor, but it's damaging flavor, that does not have an effect on the kosher item, even if it's more than a 60th. The perfect example goes back to the 60th century. The Ramah, Ramosha Isserlis, Krakow, 1560, was asked by someone, how on earth do you allow in your community people to enjoy Italian olive oil? Italian olive oil is treif. Why? The Shoel notes that I heard from someone who heard from their father that when they transport the barrels from Italy into Europe, it wouldn't be doable. The oil would penetrate through the wood. So what they do is they smear the surface of the internal surface of the barrel with some fat.
Sherry cask.
Sherry cask, similar to it. Okay, with some chazer. So they asked the Ramah, what's the status? It is osur. It seems to be osur. So the Ramah says that you should know there is absolutely no problem because it is a noten tam livgam. In other words, the flavor, if in your olive oil you're going to go ahead and send some chazer flavor, it's a damaging flavor. So therefore he said it's no problem. And then he added an additional piece of information that if everyone tastes, if the whole world drinks the product, and no one can detect, no one has ever said, you know what, this olive oil has a little bit of a chazer flavor in it. Since no one has said that, so obviously the flavor is not there. And therefore he believed there is absolutely no problem. So the Rav Yaakov Emden uses the same logic for the coffee. He notes that ein lachush, it's a no sen tam livgam. Coffee, would you want a little bit of fat from an animal in your cup of coffee? Obviously, a no sen ta'am livgam. You know, this idea of no sen ta'am livgam, it's not this great chiddush. It is one, there's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch that if, let's say, I have a teacher in town, I'm not allowed to give a psak if my Rebbe is in town. It's a tremendous chutzpah. So I'm not allowed to give hora'ah. However, the halacha tells us that hora'ah is only if there's a chiddush. If there's a new insight, I cannot come up with a new insight if my teacher is in town. However, if it's something that is yadua upashut, if it's something that is well known and it's simple, I am allowed to tell you that it is permissible even if my master is in town. What is the perfect example of something that's simple? Noten ta'am livgam. In other words, it's the most basic psak that exists. If something gives a damaging flavor, it is 100%, you don't have to worry about it. So this is something that Rav Yaakov Emden uses, and this is something that the Ramah uses, and therefore he argues there is absolutely no problem at all. And it's interesting to note, recently there was an article, and today with the web, everyone heard about it, the CRC of Chicago, a well-respected kosher organization, and it's headed by a close friend of mine, Rabbi Shalom Fishbang, who is a Torah scholar. And he wrote an article about coffee. And basically, he found some problem with Starbucks. What, as they say, b'mechilas kvodo, one area he ignored is the fact that his concern was that they have sandwiches in Starbucks, right? They use their plates there. The plate perhaps had a little bit of the turkey left on it, even though I believe that it's so expensive that anyone that buys it eats it and licks the plate afterwards. But the concern was that there was a little bit of turkey left on the plate. The plate was placed in the dishwasher. The dishwasher had the basket of the coffee. Da-da-da-da-da, bingo, we have an issue here. We were able to find an issue because the fat was transported from turkey to plate to dishwasher. So he said there is reason to be lenient, and he comes up with explanations with the soap, with the detergent, that it's pogem. But in essence, the question really doesn't begin. Does anyone want, or can anyone even dream of the fact that turkey benefits the flavor of your coffee? I don't think so. It is an obvious, and this is what the Yavitz is telling us, it's a no sen ta'am livgam. So therefore, there is no problem halachically with coffee. There are those that have issues with ingredients. They say, I think, frappuccino, but the other coffees, if the ingredients are fine, like your latte, like your cappuccino, and like your plain coffee, drink it and enjoy it. And that's really what the halacha tells us. And there's also some kind of change in attitude. And I'll share with you what I mean by that. We know about the Sofer family. The Chatam Sofer passed away in 1839. It was a rabbinic family. And it still remains a great rabbinic family, even nowadays in Eretz Yisrael. A tremendous amount of Torah scholars, descendants of the Chatam Sofer. He had 2 grandchildren, brothers. And both became Rabbonim, one of them in his city, Preshburg, and the other one in Erloi. The brothers were Reb Shimon Sofer of Erloi. Reb Shimon Sofer was born, I think, around 1845. And he was taken, maybe it was 1850, and he was basically taken to Auschwitz at 895. They put him in a gas chamber. 95 years old. It's like unbelievable. And Reb Shimon Sofer's son, which would be a great-grandson of the Chatam Sofer, was Rabbi Avraham Sofer, who put out the Me'iris, well-respected scholar as well. So Reb Shimon Sofer and his brother Reb Simcha Bunim were asked a question. The question was about coffee. Why? There was a new concern. Coffee, early 19th century, was no longer pure. They added chicory. Chicory was added to coffee, a significant amount. It seemed to be earlier on something that was financially beneficial. The coffee was imported from the other end of the world. Chicory can be grown locally. So therefore they added. But eventually people got accustomed to the taste of the mix of chicory and coffee. People wanted chicory in their coffee. Chicory is no problem. However, they note in their tshuva that the issue seems to be because they add shuman davar acher. They add some lard into the chicory. This was a shaila that was asked to them. Chicory is enhanced by the lard. Chicory is added to the coffee. What's the status of the coffee? So the first time I read this, I say this, some rabbi, it is impossible. Lo and behold, it's 100% true, because you're able today to go to Google Books, and you could go ahead and search 19th century literature, and you punch in lard, coffee, chicory, and you get the formulas. The formulas are presented, and they actually, this was a real halachic issue. The coffee had close to 30% chicory, and the roasters, and I am reading from an 1845 work called the Magazine of Science and School of Arts, ich weiß nicht, but the roasters generally introduced into the roasting machine about 2 pounds of lard for every 100 of chicory. Chicory was enhanced by lard. Yikes. Now you would say, well, the package must have said something, so you go through the rules and regulations that existed during that period of time. It's interesting to note that in England, the legislator in 1822 said that you must be sure that if you package chicory in your coffee, that it must have the proper name. But by 1840, realizing that it became the norm, they allowed the dealers in coffee were permitted to sell a mixture of chicory and coffee, provided that they pay tax, but that's it. Meaning, you would be able to purchase, in 1840, you would purchase a package of coffee, it had chicory, the chicory had lard, a real halachic issue. The question was, is it nullified or not? Because if you look at the lard vis-a-vis the coffee and the chicory, it is less than 60. But since they would first process the chicory in the lard, so the chicory would become what's known as a chaticha nasa nevela, would become all a shtick prohibited, and there was not enough to nullify the chicory, so you had a real significant halachic issue. Okay, how do you deal with it? But this is what's fascinating. These rabbinic authorities don't jump up with excitement and say, osur, but rather they say, listen, bevadai, writes Reb Shimon Sofer in his tshuva, shelo liknot, it is much better, vadai, without a doubt, you should only purchase it from a place where you know they don't mix it. But lehachriz isur befumbei ein beyadenu. We shouldn't get up and make these announcements. In other words, since I was able somehow to come up with a leniency, The leniency, and it's a dochuk, it's a difficult leniency, but the leniency is there not to make a big to-do. So if a Baal Nefesh, if a specific person asks, you go ahead and you tell them that perhaps is a problem. But do not make a tumult, he notes. And then he quotes the Divrei Chaim from Tzanz, a great Torah scholar, a great Hasidic leader, and he noted the same. Av sheyesh limnoa melishtot. Yes, it is indeed a problem. Ein beyadenu la'asor. Do not make a tumult. So what's fascinating to me is that when there is a real halachic issue, and to come up with a leniency there, you have to work hard. The rabbis have that sensitivity. You don't run and prohibit something that is difficult, that is a challenge to society. And in a different era, when coming up with the stringency is extremely difficult, they work hard to find the chumrah, and they make it into a different era, what we can learn from these Gedolei Yisrael during this period of time. So this is something that we find in 19th century, we find it with London as well, with the tshuva of the Ramah. And it's one that indicates that coffee was something quite significant as well. I mentioned the fact that rabbis liked their coffee. I mentioned the Pri Chodosh, when he talks about drinking before davening. He says, the halacha says you don't eat and drink before davening. But when it comes to coffee, but come on, ein hadat mityashevet belo kafeh. How can you daven without a coffee? You need a cup of coffee for your morning davening. It mentions as well, there's an issue on a fast day. On a fast day, eating and drinking before Ma'ariv. Halachic issue. We try not to until after Ma'ariv. So Real told that the Chassam Sofer would not eat or drink before Ma'ariv on a fast day. He was careful to daven his Ma'ariv late enough where he could get Kriya Shema at night. But there was one thing he would drink before Ma'ariv. Et ha-kafeh he would get before Ma'ariv. Now, it's interesting as well that coffee spreads into Europe through Italy. And Italian authorities addressed coffee in the 17th century. There's a scholar who wrote an article arguing that the fact that coffee made its appearance as Kabbalistic practices, namely staying up for midnight for Tikkun Chatzos, staying up Shavuos all night, Hoshana Rabbah all night. These practices spread around the same in Europe around the same time that coffee made its appearance. So this is a scholarly work which you would imagine that has no teeth, but Lemaise, he found a source. There was a rabbinic authority, Reb Moshe Zakut. In Italian, he was known as Reb Moshe Zakuto. Reb Moshe Zakut was a tremendous Kabbalist, great Kabbalist. He actually got his early chinuch in Amsterdam. It seemed to be he was in the same school as Spinoza. So I wonder exactly what kind of conversations the two had. Eventually he settles in Italy, and he teaches the Kabbalah of the Ari. And he was asked the question about drinking coffee before tefillah. And he says that the norm is to drink it, and people that wake up early or people that stay up late, they want to linaded hashena, they want to remove sleep from their eyes. They are the ones that benefit from coffee, kanoda, as known to us. We great Kabbalists, coffee is a big part of the practice because that's how we have the ability to go ahead and stay up late. So it's something that had an impact in the halachic world, had its impact in the halachic world as well. You know, one of those psukim that I consider emotional psukim that's mentioned was a question asked to the Rabbi Yaakov Breish, a rabbi in Switzerland. And it was a she'ela mimachane plitim from a DP camp. It was right after the war. And the food that they did get was all cold on Shabbos. The only option of getting a hot drink on Shabbos was coffee from the local village next door. So of course you can imagine it was a posek, a sensitive posek. And he notes that kevan she'ha'avir sham kar, it's cold outside. Ve'ein la plitim sham shum cham, there's nothing warm for them. And in addition, it's considered a mitzvah, because as we know, a sign that you are not a heretic is achieved by drinking hot. Kol mi she'eino ochel chamin, says the Baal HaMaor. Whoever does not eat something hot during Shabbat day, Chayshinan Shem Amin, you are concerned that he's a heretic because there were movements that read the text literally, that you are supposed to have no fire on Shabbos, so therefore the Karaites would not have any heated food. So to indicate that we don't have such a reading, that we believe in oral tradition, we would eat our hot food on Shabbos. So therefore, Reb Reish says it is extremely important to allow them to have hot food, so therefore it's 100% permissible without a doubt. So that's one of those emotional shilas regarding coffee itself. So but we can't, I think it would not be fair to address the issue without touching on Pesach, coffee and Pesach, right? So, the modern day coffee beans are fine, ground coffee is fine. The only issue is really with the decaffeinated. There are two ways to decaffeinate your coffee. One is with the fresh water system, which is more expensive, and the result will be you would have a decaffeinated bean that would be kosher Pesach. But then there is one that they soak the bean in a solution that has some grain alcohol, and it's made it into chametz. The interesting shaila is because the alcohol does not remain in the bean, but they wash the alcohol out. There's nothing that remains there. But nevertheless, due to the fact that the bean at some point did have some chametz in it, it remains something that you avoid. So decaffeinated is one that needs more of a hashgacha than the caffeinated one. Until about a decade ago, we used to use even the instant coffee, any instant coffee for Pesach. But then they realized that a few of the facilities that produce the coffee are actually using also some malt drinks that have flavors that are chametz. So today, even for the instant, it's considered correct to use only one with hashgacha, or one that they did their research, that they come from equipment that's fine. But the Pesach coffee, I'll share with you two tshuvas of Rav Yaakov Emdin, a rabbi who enjoyed his coffee, and a rabbi that as a result you will know, and you know already the direction he's going to be going in. Number one, the roaster. The question was that there was some roasting taking place of coffee. The roaster was not kashered for Pesach. It wasn't used for many weeks, but it wasn't kashered for Pesach. So Rav Yaakov Emdin says that it is fine. He was challenged. He responds, Yafeh amarti. My psak remains, and you should know, hamachmir, those who do not want to eat the product due to the fact that the roaster was used several months ago for some questionable product, nifsad besimchat yom tov chinam. He is losing out in the mitzvah of simchas yom tov for no reason. And therefore, when it comes to the person who drinks it, he actually benefits. It's an interesting way of viewing it. But the other one was, it's interesting, there was always mystery that existed in the past. Mystery. You would get products in the marketplace. You would have absolutely no idea where they originate from. Today, you have an interest, there's a food channel. You could go online on YouTube and punch in any product, and you can know how it's made, where it originates. Take something like sugar, right? Rabbis in Europe did not really know how it's produced. There was a popular item with the sugar hut. It was like some kind of sugar cone that was made. It came from the New World. There was a rabbi, the Taz, who actually believed that these things grow on a tree, that there is a tree that produces these cones of sugar, because he thought that it was in its natural state, and therefore he paskin that they are okay on Pesach, because it's basically the fruit of a tree. They did not know the realities, and what can you expect? It was a very different world. The first time Europeans actually saw a coffee tree was in 1715. It could be they saw drawings, I'm sure they did, and if someone did a little bit of research, they could know. But the average European did not see an actual coffee tree until 1715, when it was brought to Paris as a gift to one of the kings. Eventually they took it, and that was used, that same tree, to go ahead and expand the production from the Arabian Peninsula to the Americas. And by the way, the coffee that you could get from the Far East, from Indonesia, for example, you have to give credit to the Dutch for bringing it there, because it's a product that originates in Ethiopia and to the Arabian Peninsula, and then eventually, it was the Dutch who controlled the seas at the time that began their plantations in those areas. the product of coffee was unseen and unknown. They knew that it's a popular drink. They knew that it was a drink that originated and the Arabs drank, but not more than that. So as a result, come Pesach, what do you think these rabbis believed it was? Kidneys. Like what else? So there was actually those. It's kidneyot. You don't know what it is, so it might as well be kidneyot. So there was a shaila asked to the Yavitz, and they talked about a specific community that had the practice of prohibiting coffee. But then, with some time, as time passed, they realized, you know what? It grows on a tree, and it's not even close to a legume. So the question is, what's the status of such a minhag? And there's a minhag that comes about due to the fact that you don't know the reality. So he makes it clear, Achshav sherabim ra'u oto beganot pardesim. Now that we all had the privilege of seeing the actual tree, so and we see that it is nothing to do with a bean, but rather it is a tree, there is no question that it's a product that is 100% permissible. It is not, and even if you claim that there was a minhag, the Yavitz and others label it a minhag ta'ut. But you have to be very careful. How far do you go with such a thing? You know, there were those that would argue the whole kidneyot, but in any event, a very fascinating psak that we have. But let's get back to Amsterdam, because that's where we began our discussion. You know, the communities and the world that we live in is one that when you have movements in one direction, you could always detect that there's going to be someone working in another direction. When you're going to have a movement to modernize, if you're going to have a movement that might recommend interacting with society to some extent, the old school is going to make its appearance, and sometimes in an ugly form, in ways that even the Gdolei Yisrael do not approve of. You know, I'll give you a perfect example. Amsterdam. Amsterdam is a world that if you think of the Jewish community in the 17th century of Amsterdam, you think of Jews interacting with society. The Dutch were more tolerant. They were travelers. They were people that understood the world. But at the same time, there are a group of zealots there. You know, for example, they print in Amsterdam the tshuva of the Ramah, the tshuvos, the response of the Ramah. One of the response of the Ramah is a fascinating one, because he was asked from Nikolsburg how, if there is a way to defend the practice of the locals that they drink non-kosher wine. There were Jews in Moravia that would drink wine that wasn't kosher. Is there a way to defend the practice? So this is a shaila that's asked to the Ramah in 1560. So he writes a tshuva and he makes it clear, non-kosher wine is not kosher. At the same time, if there is a practice by some, I will go ahead and figure out a way to defend it. Defend. It's something that we have to bring into our way of thinking, that there are things that we would say we don't eat, but at the same time, due to the fact that we view ourselves as part of Klal Yisrael, defend those who do. We had a system that we learned 2 weeks ago. Remember the system? The one Magen David level. What's a one Magen David level or a half a Magen David level? It's a level of kashrut that we're not comfortable with. We're not going to bring it into our home, and even on the road, we will probably avoid it. But at the same time, we want to have such a level because when we see other Jews that have such a practice, we want to value them. We want to appreciate the fact that they still practice Judaism. We can take it to the Hebrew national level. Hebrew national is something we won't eat. It is something that even on the road we won't touch. But at the same time, if you see Jews who would only purchase it because they think it's kosher, so at the same time you could value the fact that you are eating it. And this was an approach that the Ramah had. They have such a practice. I'm going to go ahead and defend it. Not in any way recommend it, but defend it. That was greatness. So this is a tshuva that the Ramah writes. Come Amsterdam in the early 18th century.